Here's something interesting I picked up at the flea market the other day. This is a Birch 78 RPM record player from probably the late 1940s or early 1950s. I found one date code that suggests 1949, and I found another one that suggests 1951, so who knows when it was made. I didn't figure any 78 RPM only record players were made after the introduction of the LP and 45 RPM record, which would have been 1948 for LPs and 49 for 45s, but I suppose there were some children's record players made later than that would only play 78 RPM records. The case on this record player is in remarkably good shape for it being as old as it is. Most of these portables that I find are usually trashed and just beat to heck to the point where they're just really not worth messing with, but this one looks like it was probably used very little and then put in a closet and forgot about. This even has a neat little design on the case, and as you can see, it's maybe a little dirty and may have a few minor little nick places on it, but it's in overall good shape. I think it's well worth restoring. Let's open it up and have a look here. We've still got what appears to be the original power cord that's in nice shape. Here's the metal tone arm and metal turntable platter, which needs to be cleaned and reflocked. And this only has a single volume and off-on switch, no tone control. And I have the original cartridge that came out of this unit. I've already cheated and removed it because it's bad. This is your typical old flat metal crystal phonograph cartridge. It was found in most 78 RPM players of the 1940s, and of course it's dead as a doornail, so we're going to have to send that off to West Tech Services and have it rebuilt. Or I was going to replace it with a modern cartridge, and I could still do that, but as you can see, maybe you can see it in this poor light, there are no mounting studs, which means this original cartridge was not held in with screws. The only thing holding it in was the fact that it was designed to fit very tightly up into the tone arm, and that's the only thing holding it. Okay, let's open this up and see what the inside looks like. Okay, here's the drive mechanism, and I'm going to tell you, this drive mechanism's in sad shape. It's very noisy and doesn't run at the right speed, so every bit of this is going to have to be removed and cleaned and lubricated, and this rubber idler wheel is in very bad shape and will need to be rebuilt. That'll be about $30 right there. I've heard of some people using a rubber O-ring to replace this old deteriorated rubber tire on here. And seeing as how an O-ring would cost me less than $1, it's very tempting for me to try that before I spend $30 to have this original idler wheel rebuilt. Okay, now we'll look under the hood and have a look at the amplifier and the speaker and the motor. Okay, here's the underside showing the chassis. This uses two Loctite tubes, which is sort of rare for these kind of record players. Most of these used either a miniature bass tube or an octal bass. But this uses two Loctite bass tubes, one rectifier, which is a 35Y4, and an output tube, which is, I believe, a 50A5. Unfortunately, this particular record player doesn't use a preamp stage, so going to be stuck with using a 3-volt cartridge in order to drive this thing to full volume, so that's yet another reason that I think I'm going to just spend the money and have this original pickup cartridge rebuilt. And as you can tell, it has the original capacitors and other components that came with this thing originally, and the capacitors will have to be replaced. I'll also check the resistors and the tubes and make sure everything's in proper order, as well as take apart this drive mechanism and clean it up real good and lubricate it. And so after I do all that, this thing should be ready to go. So let's get started on it. And one thing to take note of is this motor board is actually made out of metal. Most of them are made out of some type of fiber board. And I'm also very happy that this chassis is not connected to one side of the AC line. Many of these did have one side of the AC line connected to the chassis, which is a major shock hazard, but in this model they appear to not be using the chassis as circuit ground. In fact, there's the schematic right there, and I don't know if you can see it, but it has a note on the schematic saying that the chassis is not grounded, so that makes me feel a lot better. Okay, let's get started on this. Okay, I just noticed something while I was removing the original multi-section electrolytic capacitor. On the schematic, they show a cathode bypass capacitor. 25 microfarad at 25 volts. However, looking at the record player here, the amplifier, they don't even have that section connected. That should be the green wire here, and they have it just wrapped around here like it was never connected from the factory. So that's pretty bad when the factory doesn't follow their own schematic. After examining this thing some more, I found a blob of solder, as can be seen right there, stuck to the chassis. And I don't know whether that's something a sloppy technician did or a sloppy assembler did, but at any rate, we can't have blobs of solder stuck to the chassis. That's just a disaster waiting to happen. And looking at this closely, it's evident that this power cord is likely not the original cord. It looks like somebody spliced that on using this old style cloth electrical tape onto the old stub of a power cord, which you can see is rotting away big time, and that will have to be replaced. Okay, the amplifier is all fixed up. I've replaced the capacitors and checked the resistors, and everything seems to be okay. You can hear the noise that this drive mechanism is making. Well, but as you can hear, the amp is producing a signal. Now, of course, being a one-tube wonder, it's not going to be much of a signal just from my finger touching the input lead. Okay, here's the work that I've done. I repaired the power cord that was dangerous, and I found a rubber grommet to put in this opening to protect the power cord against the metal chassis. Replace the electrolytic filter caps, check the resistors, they're good, check the tubes, they're good, and I replaced this capacitor, and I had to use some of the original capacitor leads because the new part was not long enough. Normally I don't like to do it that way, but we're about out of time, so thanks for watching, and part 2 will be coming along shortly.